My name is Allison Smith. I'm very happy to be here. I'm chair of the art history department here. I teach a few different classes. I teach ancient to medieval, and then I teach a Renaissance to modern, and then I teach a 20th and 21st century class. So basically from cave painting to the present. So I have a few dates swimming around in my head. Hopefully I'll be able to recall everything on demand. But what we're talking about today is the history of Kansas art. We won't have time to talk about every artist who's been through the state of Kansas, but I'm going to focus on a few that I think are especially important and a few that really illustrate, I think, this notion of the power of place for the Midwestern artists and how living here in Kansas especially informs the art production that we see here. I've given you a little outline of some of the major artists that I'll be showing you examples of in their work and talking about them in a little bit more detail, but we'll also talk about a few other artists, even some European artists who influenced these local artists. I'm not going to just lecture straight for 2 hours, then you might all actually fall asleep. Don't worry about that. I'll talk maybe for about an hour or so. We'll take a short break. I'll let you get up and use the bathroom, get a drink, whatever you might need to do. Then we'll come back and we'll do a part 2, and I have a couple short video clips to show you and a few things like that. Okay? Does anybody have any questions or anything before we get started? All righty. Okay, so first off, a little disclaimer. You know, sometimes we think when we have discussions about American art or art history in general, Kansas isn't necessarily the hot spot that comes to mind when we talk about art production in this country or anywhere really. We tend to focus on the coasts as really the leading centers for art production, at least in this country certainly. But there are others who would argue that art is really everywhere in this state, especially when you consider some of the natural wonders of our state. Our beautiful prairies, the rolling flint hills, our expansive skies and beautiful sunsets and so forth. We are sitting very close, however, to the only contemporary art museum in the state of Kansas. Our JCC's Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, right across the courtyard here from where we're sitting in the Carlson Center. And this building opened just a few years ago, and now we have our own contemporary art museum for the state. And a number of the artists, several of the artists I'll be talking about in the second half of our class are part of the collection here at the Nerman Museum. The first 3 artists that I have that are listed on your handout, I grouped this first section from the textbook. And the reason I call this section of artists from the textbook is because these are artists who are typically covered in an art survey class, even for students not studying here in the state of Kansas. These are artists who have made the art history textbooks, and they're taught in curriculums across the United States. And the very first artist that I'm going to focus on is a man named Birgir Sandzen. Birgir Sandzen, whose life dates are 1871 to 1954, is originally from Sweden. And I know that seems very hypocritical of me to start my Kansas lecture on an artist from Sweden. But he didn't live in Sweden his entire life. He was born in Sweden. He did study in Paris for quite a long time, but at a very young age, when he was only 24 years old in 1895, he moved to Kansas. And he will stay in Kansas, teach and paint himself for the rest of his life. And he dies when he's 83, so he lives a very long life. He moves to Kansas when he's only 24 and stays there until he's 83. So it's quite a significant period of time. He moves to Lindsborg, Kansas, where Bethany College is. He becomes the chair of the art department there. He's extremely influential. And he promotes a particular style of painting, not only for his students, but across the state. And I'll talk a little bit about how he does that in a few minutes. I want to point out quickly, though, what was going on at this time. I said that he moved to our state in 1895. Now, the last French Impressionist exhibition in Paris was in 1888. I don't know if any of you have seen the water lilies exhibit yet at the Nelson. Has anyone gotten there? It's just beautiful. It opened to the public on Saturday, this past Saturday, so it's open now. And you know, we have one of Monet's panels of the water lilies, and it is supposed to be grouped in threes. It's a triptych or three-paneled painting, and the other two are with it for the first time in many, many years. So it's a beautiful painting by Claude Monet. And right after that period of Monet, French Impressionism, a period called Post-Impressionism became very popular. That's the period that we're talking about with Birgir Sandzen, right around 1895. And that was a period where artists wanted to use light and color to invoke emotion in their artwork. And Birgir Sandzen was certainly very familiar with this movement. He's just studied in Paris. He's seen the French Impressionists and the Post-Impressionist works. He comes to Kansas and he wants to employ those techniques in his own painting. So he takes the study of color and light that we see here in the artist George Seurat and Vincent van Gogh, you're probably familiar with, and he applies it to our local landscape. So he paints a Kansas landscape, but he does so using that color and light. And I have a quote by Birgir Sandzen. I always like to include a quote when we have them from various artists that I'm covering in class, because I feel like they can certainly speak to their art better than I can. So I'd like to read you this quote quickly. This is what Sandzen said. He said, "I feel that one should be guided in both composition and use of color by the character of the landscape. There are Western motifs out here, especially in a certain light, which are distinguished by their majestic lines, as in protruding rocks, rolling prairie, and winding ravines." Then he goes on to say, "One should, when painting such motifs, first of all emphasize the rhythm of the landscape. And it's clear that a color technique should be used that emphasizes the most characteristic feature of the landscape." So using color and light to convey that wonderful rhythm of the Kansas landscape was certainly very important for Sandzen, as important as it was for the French Impressionists, who are doing that very same thing with the French landscape. And we can see another beautiful example of that rhythm and movement and emotional quality of the color and light in this famous painting by Vincent van Gogh, The Starry Night. Okay, so I alluded a few minutes ago to the fact that Birgir Sandzen really promoted his style of art throughout the state. How did he do that, being in a tiny little town in Kansas? Well, there was this, this group of women, the Kansas Federation of Women's Councils, and they promoted the study and appreciation of art across the state. And this particular woman, Karen Applington from Council Grove, Kansas, became the chair of this Federation of Women's Councils, and she founded the Applington Art Gallery, named after her and her husband. And she founded that art gallery and asked Birgir Sandzen for suggestions for artwork to be exhibited there. So Birgir Sandzen offers his own artwork as well as his chosen students, who he feels is promoting the ideals that he teaches in his class. So they're artists who create work that looks similar to his own work. And they're exhibited not only at the Applington Art Gallery, but these women, this federation of women all over the state of Kansas will actually use this as a traveling show, and this artwork will travel across the state. And it really promotes not only Birgir Sandzen's work, but like I said, the work of his students, and as a result, he acquires quite a degree of popularity, and his works now are in the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. If you visit the New American Wing, you'll see a couple of his paintings hanging there now. So he really does a lot to promote his own art, as well as a number of other Kansas artists. Alrighty, the next artist we're going to look at on your handout is John Steuart Curry. Now, Birgir Sandzen did a wonderful job of incorporating this very popular Parisian style with post-impressionism in the landscape and bringing that to the United States. However, by about the 1920s or so, landscape painting is looked at as kind of provincial. The art world in Paris and in New York is becoming much more avant-garde, much more modern. You might be familiar with the Armory Show of 1913, which is located in New York City. They're bringing in very avant-garde abstract artists, and they're not really into landscape painting. John Steuart Curry, who is from Kansas, from a farm outside of Topeka, goes to New York to study. He actually, to give you a little bit more background, he actually starts his education at the Art Institute in Kansas City, goes on to the Chicago Art Institute, then he studies in Pennsylvania, then he goes to Paris also, just like Birgir Sandzen. Paris was kind of where it was at, but then he ends up in New York, and as a very bold move, begins to paint these scenes of the Kansas prairie and family life on the Kansas prairie. And he's living in New York at the time. So this was very, this actually was the avant-garde. The avant-garde was what was kind of status quo. Abstraction, modernism was what was becoming accepted by the 1920s in New York, and this was considered very unusual. John Steuart Curry's, well, let me give you a little bit of context of his work. In the 20s up into maybe 1940 or so is when American abstraction is brewing. This painting, Lavender Bisque by Jackson Pollock, happens to date to 1950. It's very representational of his style. But this style, this type of abstraction, the New York School and so forth had been really forming decades before this. So this is really what the art world is promoting at the time, not the work of John Steuart Curry. John Steuart Curry is a member of a group of artists called the American Scene Painters. And the American Scene Painters are artists like Curry who are working in New York, but they're reflecting on their own background from the Midwest. And the most well-known artists from the American scene movement are Grant Wood from Iowa, Thomas Hart Benton, of course, from Missouri, and John Steuart Curry from Kansas. And I'm not sure if you know this, maybe a couple of you know that Jackson Pollock, the artist we just referred to, was a student of Thomas Hart Benton. And this actually is Jackson Pollock here modeling for this painting by Thomas Hart Benton that hangs in the Spencer Museum in Lawrence. So we're very fortunate, so close, to have one of Thomas Hart Benton's most notable paintings. This is in the 20th century art history textbook that's produced out of New York. John Steuart Curry's family was very well educated. His father was a farmer, but valued the arts and took his family to Europe. They traveled to Europe. He had a print by Peter Paul Rubens, a poster of a painting by Peter Paul Rubens in their living room. So John Steuart Curry saw this work by Peter Paul Rubens every day, and he actually will have a huge influence on his own work. You can see the musculature of the figures. Of course, Peter Paul Rubens is influenced himself by Michelangelo, so we can kind of say indirectly that John Steuart Curry is also influenced by Michelangelo, but this is the painting that you would have seen on a regular basis in his own home. He also was influenced by Gustave Courbet. Like I said, he traveled to Paris and would have seen this painting that would have been housed in the Louvre at that time. It's now in the Musée d'Orsay. And this is an example of realism, painting real, everyday people engaged in hard work. This was a movement in Paris in the 19th century that tried to promote the common man. And that's exactly what John Steuart Curry will do in his own painting. Okay, in this work, John Steuart Curry, in this work and a number of his works, he deals with the subject of man versus nature. So we see the family on the prairie dealing with this impending tornado. Now, when local Kansans saw this work, they were a little bit offended by it. They thought it was kind of stereotypical, and here we go again with the tornado, and they weren't real thrilled with it. The people in New York, though, found it fascinating. You know, people not from Kansas find tornadoes a great mystery. I grew up in Southern California, and I much prefer tornadoes. There's no siren that goes off when you're about to have an earthquake. It just happens. The siren helps, I think, and that's obviously what, you know, they're reacting, they're taking cover, and they're having time to prepare. This work, Baptism in Kansas, also was a work that was very much celebrated on the East Coast. The folks in New York were fascinated by it, so fascinated actually that the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York purchased it, and that's where it hangs now. The folks in Kansas, not so much. They thought that they were being made fun of. There are some stereotypical elements, the large windmill, for example, and they thought that maybe they were being used, it may be kind of embarrassed for John Steuart Curry's own ends. And they compared Curry's depiction of people in Kansas to Paul Gauguin's depiction of Tahitian women. Paul Gauguin, a good friend of Vincent van Gogh's, a post-impressionist who is a wealthy stockbroker in Paris, tells his wife and family he's leaving Paris and he's moving to Tahiti. He's going to become an artist. Now that dinner conversation went over real well, I'm sure. He leaves, he moves to Tahiti. He's there basically for the rest of his life, and these are his paintings that he's most well known for. We have one of these in the Nelson as well. And this idealization of the other, or kind of an exotic group of people, is what the local Kansans thought they were experiencing with John Steuart Curry's work. Curry will receive a number of important commissions in the state. This work that you're probably familiar with, these large-scale murals in the Kansas State Capitol building. There were a few issues with this. There were several scenes that were depicted here: the settlement of Kansas, the life of the homesteader, and which is what you're looking at here, and pastoral property. One of the images, not this one obviously, but one of them depicted pigs eating out of a trough. And apparently, maybe some of you know this, but apparently pigs, when they eat, their tails go straight. Which is fascinating to me. I thought they were always curly, and I guess John Steuart Curry also thought they were always curly because he painted them with curly tails, as we think about when we think of pigs. And that was another point that a number of Kansans took issue with, that he must not really be a true Kansan because the pigs are eating and their tails are curly, they're supposed to be straight. He had to go back to the Capitol and change them. There are a number of issues, a number of controversies with the murals. He eventually storms off the project, never even signs the work. It still is unsigned to this day. Unfortunately, he had a heart attack at a pretty young age. He was only 48 years old when he dies, and the works remain unsigned to this day. There were a couple other controversies with this work, a larger image. Of course, we see the tornado again in the background. We also see, this is John Brown here, and it looks like he has blood on his hands. His hands are red, so Kansans are wondering, are you implying that John Brown is a murderer? And Steuart Curry said, well, you know, some people might say that. That didn't go over real well. So again, some of these issues, the tornado, the prairie fire, the blood on John Brown's hands just was not real well received by the locals, but yet celebrated by the folks on the East Coast. Okay, our third and final artist from this first segment is a man named Aaron Douglas. Aaron Douglas, whose life dates are 1899 to 1979, was an African-American painter. He was born in the 19th century but achieved international acclaim in the 20th century. He was born in Topeka. He received a BA from the University of Kansas in 1923, but he's best known for his work that he does after he moves to New York. He's one of the foremost painters of a movement known as the Harlem Renaissance. And the Harlem Renaissance is a movement in Harlem in New York that encouraged African-American artists to acknowledge different aspects of their own personal history. Sometimes celebrate that history, but not necessarily always celebrate it, just simply acknowledge it in either paintings, drawings, prints such as these, or music, poetry, literature, dance, and so forth, any type of art form that was going on at the time. In addition to painting, Aaron Douglas also illustrated the magazine, The Crisis, and the other magazine, The Opportunity, both publications, prominent Harlem Renaissance publications. Like Curry, Douglas also studies painting in Paris. He then goes to Fisk University in Nashville and he becomes a painting professor there. Then he's given a huge commission in New York, which is where this work comes from, to paint the murals in the 135th Street Public Library. And he paints a series of murals there where he very brilliantly, I think, fuses the African experience that he's wanting to promote, being part of the Harlem Renaissance, with contemporary modernism that's coming out of Paris at the time. So we see some influences from Cubism, another movement known as Futurism that comes out of Italy but is similar in how the colors are kind of fractured and the picture plane is shattered a little bit. This is another very important work by Aaron Douglas, Aspects of Negro Life, where he represents many different aspects of African American experience. We see men here bending down, picking cotton. We see references to the Ku Klux Klan on the left. We have a man here standing on a soapbox encouraging people to go to the Capitol and vote. This person actually is and is dropping his ballot into the ballot box. Here we see a slave who's broken off his chains, and then we see a reference to American jazz music. So acknowledging the good and the bad, as well as celebrating contemporary African American culture. Did anybody see the exhibit of Aaron Douglas's work when it was at the Spencer Museum of Art? Susan Earle, curator at the Spencer Museum in Lawrence, spent nearly a decade putting together a beautiful exhibition of Aaron Douglas's work, prints, some of those magazine covers were there, his letters and so forth, and it practically filled the museum. It was a huge exhibit, and it then traveled to the Smithsonian Institution in DC, and I thought, you know, it's extremely rare for an exhibit to start at the Smithsonian and come to the Spencer. It's basically, it just never happens that it starts at the Spencer and goes to the Smithsonian. Now, I was so thrilled to be able to see the exhibition in both places, and the exhibit at the Spencer itself was a little bit more intimate and really nicely done. Okay, we're gonna have a little quiz. You could use your handout to mark your answers, see who's paying attention. Okay, I haven't noticed anybody falling asleep, which is good. Okay, are you ready? It's hard because you have 3 slides and you only have 3 choices, so you have a 33% chance of getting them right. Okay, I love to do this in class where I show my students unknowns, meaning these are images they haven't seen in class, they're not in their textbook, but by looking at the style of the work, you should be able to guess which artist did it. So let's see. Okay, so mark it down. Don't shout out the answer. Mark it on your handout. Which one, A, B, or C, is this one number 1? Okay, you ready for number 2? Okay, here's number 2. Ready? Number 3, by process of elimination. Okay. What was number 1? Aaron Douglas. Okay. What was number 2? Sandzen. And number 3? Curry. See how much you've learned already? You guys are so smart. All right. Okay, let's go into part 2. Part 2, outsider art. Outsider art. I love the topic of outsider art. I think it's a group of artists that really best illustrates our topic today, the power of place for the Midwestern artists in particular. Usually when we talk about outsider art, it's hard to classify these artists. Some people will call them folk artists, but that's not really precisely correct. Typically they're artists that don't necessarily have any formal training. They can't really be categorized. They're not even necessarily influenced by other artists. They're extremely independent, free-thinking individuals, which is, I think, very appropriate when we're talking about some of this free-thinking, pioneering spirit of the Kansas prairie. The first artist we'll talk about is S.P. Dinsmoor, and his life dates are there. He was born in Ohio, but he moves to Kansas, Lucas, Kansas, when he's only 45 years old, so he spends half of his life there. Prior to moving to Lucas, he was a nurse in the Civil War, then he became a school teacher in Illinois. He joins the Masonic Lodge and he attends a number of lectures on free thought, and free thought encouraged people to deal with their issues independently. It kind of had a pull yourself by your bootstraps mentality, and this will certainly be reflected in S.P. Dinsmoor's work. This is his work that maybe you're familiar with, the Garden of Eden in Lucas. It still stands. It's one of the premier works of grassroots art in the United States. People travel from all over the U.S. to visit it. Lucas is a pretty tiny town. It has only about 600 people in the town. It's the most significant draw in the city and one of the most significant in the state. It's one of the wonders of the Great Plains. And they also have a nice little museum there, the Grassroots Art Museum. The house, he lived in this house. He constructed it himself. He built it himself. It's a faux log cabin. I say faux because it's not really a log cabin. The logs, or what look like logs, are really made out of limestone and concrete. The entire structure is made out of limestone and concrete. Some of the logs are as long as 27 feet long, these huge limestone beams, really, that are fit together in these kind of dovetail fittings. So it's a very elaborate elaborate structure. It took many, many years to complete. No two windows or doors are the same size, so it's very kind of quirky and individualized. 113 tons of concrete. 113 tons of concrete there. There's another kind of interesting construction on the site, this enormous 40-foot tall mausoleum where he and his first wife are buried. He will remarry after he buries his first wife to a young girl who's 20 years old, and he was 81 at the time. And dare I say it, she did bear him 2 children. We won't even go there. But yeah, he was 81, she was 20. And he was 64 years old when he started working on this massive project. It took him over 20 years to complete. Let's see, what other stats can I give you about this? It's so complex, we won't have time to talk about all of the figures, but we do see a reference to the tree of life here and Adam and Eve. Dinsmoor will use his own self-portrait for the figure of Adam on the right there. Due to local townspeople protesting, he finally agrees to put an apron on the figure. It was originally nude, and that didn't go over real well. We see hundreds of electric lights all over the concrete sculptures. And these were the first electric lights in town, first ones to be seen in Lucas. So those were quite the attraction in themselves. And this is what Dinsmoor said. He said, "There was darkness on the face of the earth, and the storks had to have lights in their mouths to see which way to go. So they carried the babies under their wings." So we see references to storks with babies under their wings and these light bulbs sticking out of their mouths. So it's kind of interesting. Number of references to the modern era, to big business and government as well. Voters with ballot boxes. So it's this interesting fusion of biblical history as well as modern day politics. And this probably the most famous scene, the crucifixion of labor there with a doctor, lawyer, banker, and preacher. This Christ-like figure representing labor crucified to the tree, representing this populist political belief that he held. This is one of the short little video clips. It's only about 10 minutes long, but after we take our break here in a little bit, I'll get that queued up for you so you can actually see tourists walking through the site. You'll get a better sense of the scale and so forth. Alrighty, okay, our second artist in Outsider Art, another so-called visionary artist, Kansas artist, is Elizabeth Layton. Sometimes she's referred to as Grandma Layton. Maybe you've heard of her. She's from Wellsville, Kansas. She was born in 1910 and she died in 1993 at the age of 83. At the age of 68, she begins life drawing classes. She suffered from depression for a good part of her life. She was divorced and raised her 5 children on her own. She says that she really identifies with the suffering of other people, and that will come out in her drawing. She says once she started life drawing classes, she never had to take medication again for her depression issues. She says the life drawing classes cured her. What she does is, the type of drawing she does is called blind contour drawing, and that's what we actually see her doing here. Blind contour drawing is, I remember doing an art project like this when I was in 7th or 8th grade, and we had to draw our hand. And basically what you would do is you would look at your hand, you'd put your pencil on the paper, and your pencil would just follow your brain as it traveled along your hand. You would never look at the paper. Sometimes you would be allowed to if you had to pick up the pencil to move it, but you would never look back and forth between the subject and the paper. So that's what she's doing. She's holding a mirror, she's looking in the mirror, and she's not looking at the paper while she draws her own self-portrait. Here's an example of one of her works. She really does this wonderful job of rejecting maybe what the common belief of a grandmother would be. She has this very powerful kind of in-your-face physical attribution. You know, she's very strong and powerful in a lot of her work, so she really typically defies stereotypes. Some of her works are quite serious. Some of them include AIDS victims. She deals with political issues such as ageism, suffering due to hunger. She deals with issues such as right to die, and so forth. A number of her works are in the Smithsonian's American Art Museum as well. Here's another work. Really wonderful, I think. Her work is universally praised. Critics love her work, and the general public does as well. These are some of the things that the critics have said about her. She is the Van Gogh of contour drawing. I'm tempted to call Leighton a genius, the New York Magazine says. Washington Post says Leighton's point of view is first humanist and then feminist. She turns the stereotypes inside out. Okay, and last but not least, my favorite, M.T. Liggett. That's me with M.T. M.T. Liggett was born in 1931. He's from Mullinville, Kansas. He has lived all over the world and traveled with the military, but then returned to his hometown of Mullinville because he says that his work is most appropriately exhibited on the prairie. He needs the rolling hills of the prairie and the wind to best show his work. Many of them are what we would call kinetic sculptures. They move, they're fueled by the wind, they're very lively, obviously, and very bright. This is a Highway 400, which is just outside of Greensburg, if you know where Greensburg is. Greensburg is about a half an hour away. You're basically driving through the middle of nowhere, and as you turn a corner onto Highway 400, all of a sudden you see this road and this farm in the background lined with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these figures. Many of the figures have political references. Some of them are representations of former girlfriends or wives. He's been married many, many times. But no matter what your religious views are or your political views are, you are sure to be offended when you see M.T. Liggett's works. In fact, that's what he lives for. If you say you're Catholic, he says he's a Protestant. If you say you're Protestant, he'll say he's a Catholic. If you're Republican, he's a Democrat. If you're Democrat, he's a Republican. As soon as you feel like you find a few works and you've gotten them figured out, and you think, well, you either like him or you don't, he spins it around and changes it up. He does not like to be pigeonholed into any one category. He loves children's art. These are my two daughters, by the way. We drive out to see him pretty frequently. We met him when I was on a tour with JCCC, and he scared the living daylights out of me. I was standing on the side of the road looking at his art, and his pickup truck pulled right in front of me and stopped. And he's huge. I don't know if you can tell, but he's well over 6 feet, big, big guy. And he leaned out of the car and had this gruff voice. And I remember just standing there going, oh, please don't hurt me. Please, please don't hurt me. And ever since that moment, I told him I loved his art, and now he loves my children, and I take them out there to camp at his farm, and he lets them paint some of his sculptures. And he's really not nearly as gruff as he likes to pretend he is. But don't tell him I said that. Here are a few other examples of some of his work. He's another artist that I have a short video clip of, and you'll get to hear him talking about some of his work. So you'll get to see this in action too, spinning and moving in the wind. He creates his sculptures with a plasma torch out of metal. The plasma torch interferes with his pacemaker. He's been told many times by his doctor to stop doing it, but he refuses to stop. He also makes his works out of abandoned road signs. I say abandoned road signs. They appear by the dark of night. He has gone to court 4 times in the last year, he's told me, because of these road signs that keep appearing on his property, which he insists he didn't sell. This is one of the works he did of me after we visited out there. I'm always torn whether or not to show it. Okay, our very last section before we take our break is called Putting Lawrence on the Map, and 3 very prominent, internationally recognized artists who are in national collections, international collections all over the world. They all happen to be from Lawrence. The art department at Baker University was established in 1858. 1858, we have our very first art department in Kansas at Baker University, and many art historians and art critics say it's because of our quantity of colleges and universities in our state that we attract a very diverse student body from all over the country and the world, and because of that we have a pretty sophisticated art market here in the state, and they think that that's why we have produced, Kansas has produced more significant artists than, say, Nebraska or Oklahoma, for example, because of our vast number of colleges and kind of the international and intellectual feel of a number of our colleges and universities. Roger Shimomura from Lawrence is probably one of the best examples. I say from Lawrence, he lives in Lawrence now, and he wasn't always from Lawrence, lived on the East Coast, or excuse me, West Coast. His BA is from the University of Washington in Seattle. He also studied on the East Coast and has an MFA from Syracuse University in New York. Started teaching at the University of Kansas in their painting department. And he's especially influenced by pop art. Many of you are familiar with Roger Shimomura's work. We have one of his paintings in our Nerman Museum and a number of his prints and our works on paper collection, which is on the first floor of this building, the Carlson Center. Most of his works deal with racial stereotyping and some of the issues he experienced when he first moved to Kansas. He said that people would often ask him where he's from, and he would say, you know, Seattle, not really understanding what they were getting at. He does this often in a very comical way because he's influenced by pop art, artists such as Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein. So sometimes they're humorous and you might start to laugh, but then you realize that he's probably really not, you know, intending this to be funny necessarily. He is the first fine arts professor to be awarded a KU Distinguished Professors Award. He also received the Kansas Governor's Art Award in 2008, and he's also received over 30 grants, including 4 National Endowment for the Arts fellowships. So he's recognized in collections all over the United States. This is the work we have in our JCCC art collection. It hangs in the Nerman Museum on the 2nd floor, and it documents his family's experience when they were living in a Japanese internment camp in Idaho. You can see the reference to Japanese screens, right? It looks like a folding screen. It also might look like a painting by Roy Lichtenstein or any other well-known pop artist. The clouds, of course, also look somewhat reminiscent of Japanese painting, as well as the unusual kind of bird's eye angle. But of course, when you look at the subject matter, not real comical. Another issue of the 2 girls on either side of the fence line there. Okay, our next Lawrence artist is Wayne Wildcat. He's an entirely self-taught painter. He's half Native American and half white, which he says impacts the balance of historical perspective in his work. Wayne Wildcat is the first artist since John Steuart Curry to exhibit an epic scale painting in the Kansas State Capitol building. This work is it. It's called Strategy. It measures 10 by 15 feet, and it was exhibited during the entire 1999 legislative session. Wayne Cat wants you to look very closely into the faces of individuals, he says, affected history and were affected by history. The central figure in this work is a buffalo skeleton. It looks like something you might see exhibited in a natural history museum, as if it were an extinct dinosaur. And then he represents individuals who contributed to the extinction of the buffalo in this area, knowing that that would, of course, lead to the extinction of the Native American. We see Buffalo Bill Cody depicted, who used a Native American in his Wild West show. We also see representations of Andrew Jackson in the painting on the right, who was responsible for relocating Indians as a result of westward expansion, and Abraham Lincoln on the left, who Wayne Wildcat says was responsible for the single greatest one-time execution of Native Americans, as well as, of course, other individuals, Custer on the right and Grant on the left, the soldiers also, of course, involved in this period of our history. I have a quote from a critic, an art critic, who describes this painting this way. He says, "Wildcat's canvas tells the tale of characters and strategy that changed the millions of stampeding buffalo into piles of bones and museum exhibits, and who did their best to exterminate the people who lived on these plains." Okay, lastly in this group is Stan Hurd, an artist who probably best forces us to look at very closely the Midwestern landscape, because he actually uses the landscape to create his artwork. Stan Hurd is from the small town of Protection, Kansas. He is a leader, the person who basically invented what is now referred to as crop art. Crop art is made out of natural materials. If you haven't found it yet, the reference for scale is up here at the top of this image with the automobile at the top. They're huge, huge, expansive works of art. His works have been created all over the world. California, New York, Australia. He's working on a number of works. One, I think it's down in Brazil, he recently said. He's done many. A number of these famous works were here in Kansas. His most famous work is the Sunflowers, which is actually made out of sunflowers. This work was profiled on CBS Sunday Morning, Dateline NBC, and even David Letterman. So he became very, very well known. In fact, gosh, a long time ago, when I was in graduate school in a 20th century art history class, we all had to give presentations, and the topic that I was assigned was earth art. I thought, oh my gosh, I drew the wrong slip of paper, because no one had even heard of earth art at the time. And I did the research, and I discovered this artist named Stan Hurd. I was going to graduate school in Washington, D.C. at American University, so I did not know Stan Hurd at the time, and have only recently gotten to know him, and it was just a thrill to actually have the opportunity to meet him, and he's now planning on doing a work here on our campus. So we're very, very excited about that. It's really, his designs are really looking great, and he's real excited to work with our horticulture students here to start working on that soon, late this spring and early summer. Here's a work that he did at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence. The wonderful thing about Stan's work is that no one can say that he's an elitist artist. He has to work with such a wonderful cross-section of people. He works with farmers and engineers and horticulturists, and students help him, and so many people are involved in his projects. This is a neat quote by Stan Hurd. He says, "All over the world, farmers draw with the plow, harrow and harvesting combine, and paint with the colors of their crops. Some of these fields rival the mystery of prehistoric ground drawings. Others conjure up the tumultuous abstractions of modern canvases." Oh, are we ready? See, did you notice it's getting progressively harder? 6. You have 6 artists to choose from now. So, okay, no one's running for the door. Okay, is everybody ready? So all of these are from part 2 and part 3. Okay, here we are. Number 1. Okay, we ready? He calls me up. "Do you know you're the only person that I've done 3 totems of?" He calls them totems. "I'm not doing another one," he says. Ready? Ready? Okay. All right. Ready for the last one? Okay. We know who they are. Wayne Wildcat. You already knew that one. Wayne Wildcat. Who's M.T. Liggett. Dinsmoor, of course. Stan Hurd. That, who is that? Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart, that one's in Atchison. Layton, Grandma Layton, Elizabeth Layton, and Roger Shimomura. That's right. Okay. All righty. Well, we've gotten through the first 3 segments. We'll look at the Garden of Eden, which is 7 minutes. And then I want to show you the Grassroots Art Center, which is about 3 minutes. So this first little segment's about 10 minutes.
Our self-serve motel is just 2 blocks away from a place we've been before but don't mind going again because the Garden of Eden is just about as good as it gets. Built back around the turn of the century by S.P. Dinsmoor, a Civil War veteran, Populist Party proponent, and showman extraordinaire.
He was 63 when he started the house. And so when he was really rolling on the sculpture, he was in his 70s. And I think he would have kept going, but he went blind. And you can tell by the way he worked, he was getting better and better as he went.
Did it make him happy?
He loved the place. He loved the fact that people were then coming here to find out about his beliefs. One of the ideas of the Populists is that you didn't beat on people, you know, this is what you had to believe. They thought that you could convert people to their way of thinking if you entertained them, if you made it funny.
A little humor.
Yeah, and so he was always doing little stunts and doing humorous things. And in these sculptures, there's a lot of humor until you get to Labor Crucified, which is not very funny at all. Labor crucified by lawyers and bankers and preachers and doctors, but most of the pieces really do have a touch of humor in them.
And concrete was kind of space-age material, right?
It was. There was a big movement to build with concrete because everybody wanted to make things that would last forever. That was a big buzzword at the time, last forever. And this is a summation of his life. This is a summation of his beliefs. So it's charged, very charged sculpture. This was built during the Russian Revolution, and he said, look, people want to be free. They want the right to determine their own life, and in Russia right now, they're using the bullet. I believe that we can use the ballot. He really believed in the American way of life, and that's why he has that really great concrete crosscut saw marked ballot. Over here is the devil getting ready to throw a pitchfork. And he said, why is it that the devil's always after the little kids? He said, if I were God, I wouldn't let the devil do this. And there's a concrete hand up there that's stopping the devil from throwing his pitchfork at the little kid. Think about a town in the 1900s. There's kerosene lights. There's this sort of yellow golden glow coming out of some houses, and that's about it. There's no street lights. He would fire up his generator, and this thing would light up. The devil always had a red light bulb in it, so the devil's eyes were glowing red. It must have been an incredible thing. It just attracted people like moths.
At least one major thing has changed since our last visit. The garden's mortgage is now paid off, and this once endangered site is no longer at risk. Though Dinsmoor's actual remains still entombed for public viewing, unless you're a camera guy, are fast going the way of all earthly things.
There are some people who just come to see the body, which baffles me, but once some of the sculptures explain to them, it starts really clicking. They start understanding what's going on, and they think it's just incredible. I think they're all at some level affected by the sculptural quality. This is a premier piece of artwork. This is, forget grassroots. This is a really great piece of art.
This DVD, by the way, it was on Kansas City Public Television. They go all over the United States, and they stop at these quirky little towns. So that each DVD is a different town and a different stop or a different region. And we have all of these in our library. You can check them out. Okay. Here's the one, the Grassroots Art Center just takes a minute.
Time to find out, we think this type of artwork increases their lifespan because they have a purpose to get up in the morning. So you want to get out of your house coat and get your clothes on, and because somebody might show up at the door. And then you've always got one more piece to work on, and so we think it really helps people live longer.
9 out of 10 doctors agree grassroots art leads to longer, healthier, more productive lives.
Longevity.
Now Rosalind is our kind of curator. What she doesn't already know, she tries to find out, and what she can't find out, we suspect she makes up. Plus, they carry our tapes right there at the front of the Grassroots Art Center, which has grown by leaps and bounds. It's still got all of Inez Marshall's great limestone sculptures carved down the road in Portis, and plenty of Ed Root's concrete and kitchenware pieces rescued from the family farm that now sits under Wilson Lake. But she's also snagged some of the psychedelic bathroom Luray's Leroy Wilson painted and painted and painted again down in his basement. And some sizable samples of M.T. Liggett's Field O' Signs in Mullinville. Perhaps sweetest of all, there's the full-size motorcycle that Herman Divers built with pull tabs in Topeka. A common theme among the folk making this particular kind of folk art is that they often didn't start till late in life. Take Clocker City's Warren Litt, a newspaper man turned totem poler.
This is what I think gives us all hope, that if at 84 you can start in creating an environment, and 3 years later you have your whole yard full of totem poles and cottonwood crotch people. Any of us, 87, he's just getting going in high gear.
Then there's Earl Slagle, a self-professed tinkerer who does the bulk of his tinkering around Manhattan.
So does this represent the molecular mass of biatomic atoms?
No, that represents that I built a machine that would make circles.
Earl has painted his trees orange, affixed unusual foliage to them, and even sculpted his own evening silhouette, more commonly known to the neighbors as the Scud Launcher.
But you have never actually launched any weapons?
No, I've threatened a neighbor's dog with it a few times.
It'd probably take me 2 days if I've got two figures.
And there's Lawrence Reynolds, whose janitor's job at Fort Hays State puts him in perfect position to pick up scraps from the art department, which he paints and welds and carves into pieces on display here as well.
This is every man's problem. It's called getting your attention. It's a barber shop, and they got two guys reading the paper. But if you look at their faces, they're looking under the lady's dress, and he's concentrating so hard looking that he cut the hair off and got a bald spot in the back of the guy's head. And most of these have a religious theme or something that really happened, like this one here, Dancing on Your Grave.
Well, I see this one down here.
Yeah, this is they're screwing with your mind.
Is that a Phillips head?
No doubt about it, there's more and more art here all the time. But Rosalind says much of the credit must go to her clientele, the people who come and get excited enough to stay on the lookout for more.
There's no hiding in TV. Come on now.
Visitors who come to the Art Center tell us about new environments in their community. So we get to go investigate it, and there's another unique Kansan sitting there doing something.
Did anybody see our M.T. Liggett film that JCCC did? JCCC has made a film about M.T. Liggett. It premiered here a couple of months ago. We're actually going to Lawrence to show the film at the Lawrence Art Center on Wednesday. So we have some interviews with M.T. and some discussion about his artwork. And that DVD will be available in the library too soon.
We're making our way back to Mullinville, a small town with a big round barn, which we aren't going to see either, and a fabulous field of folk art, which we are. And this isn't even it. Just overflow from the main attraction over on the other side of town. Not far from the shed where M.T. Liggett, U.S. Air Force veteran, has been making stuff since 1989.
North of here, along the street, I built a gargoyle to protect my horse. That was the first one.
One sculpture, right?
Started with one, and then I put the county commissioners up down here on the road, and then I just kept building, and kept it going and going and going and going. And the quickest way to die when you're my age is sit down. And I work 7 days a week. A person is never remembered by the words you don't say. I'll tell you what, this is my art, it's the way I talk. And I piss a lot of people off. Hey, here's one of them I'm getting this started too. It's gonna be Boss Hog.
That's a nice looking shape. Now, did you draw that freehand or you just start cutting?
I draw everything freehand.
But now you learned that in art school? You went to art school or something?
No, I've always said this. The best artist in the world is probably a 5 or 6 year old kid. There's the best artist. And then they get these so-called art teachers in there that screw up their brains, and they teach them what censure is, and they say, the hell with it. That's what happened to me. I have a lot of trouble sometimes with religious fundamentalists, and they'll start in on me, you know. And I don't know all that much about religion. I don't want to know, but I know enough to get a fight started.
Now, a lot of these folks you're happy with, right?
Oh, yeah. Everybody from then on, I'm happy with them.
I think everybody gets the mistaken idea that if you're up here, you're in trouble for some reason.
No, these people didn't know. Here's my next door neighbor. This girl is a recorder for the 16th Judicial District. This is the Dragon Lady, good friend of mine. Now here's a gal friend of mine. I met her in Madrid, Spain.
Now these aren't painted yet, looks like, all the way.
I've quit painting, really.
Really? Too much work or too high up or what?
No, rust is the thing.
Rust is pretty nice.
Here's one of my last windmills I put up. That's a heavy sapsucker. These winds are really hard on stuff.
Yeah, I got to take it, your opinions have changed over time.
No.
Some of them?
No.
What about Rush for president in 1996?
I had to put that up there to make the people think about it.
Yeah? What do you think now?
Rush Limbaugh? I'd like to get hold of what he's got, get me a 3 or 4 pound sack of those. Here's the 3 Faces of Eve. We've all read that story. I like old Jim Carville, but you know, he's crazier than That's Bill Clinton, by the way. See it? I got a padlock on his fly. I just loved old Bill Clinton. God damn, if you wanted the story, all you had to do was follow him for a little while and you got it. You know, for all of his damn faults, that son of a bitch is a politician. What, are you gonna try to make a 5-minute clip?
Yeah.
That's what I figured.
That'd be my guess. 5 minutes where you don't cuss too much?
I won't swear anymore at all.
You swear?
I won't swear anymore.
Are you, let me ask you this, Timothy, are you ever satisfied with these?
Well, I always work on a better one. The next one you make is always the best one. Really. So you're the camera guy.
Oh, that's it.
Good thing we know that MT's bark is worse than his bite. But we're still honoring him with commemorative garb and a first-hand look at the big ball itself.
Yeah. We are like 3 stupid guys, aren't we?
Well, no, you're kind of crazy. But, you know.
You know, the great thing about seeing some of this is it kind of makes you all want to go home and start making some art, doesn't it? You start to realize, oh my gosh, we all have it in us. Okay, I just have to power up my PowerPoint real quick, and we will wrap this up. I have a few other slides to show you some artists that are working right now. What's happening now? Okay, so I'd like to talk just briefly about the notion of documenting our region in photography, and that's been done, of course, since the Great Depression. Dorothea Lange is not from Kansas, but I wanted to show you her work because she's probably the most famous documentary photographer who first captured people from this area. This is her famous work, The Migrant Mother, which is also known as the Madonna of the Depression. During the Depression and during the Dust Bowl, the United States government actually funded artists, photographers in particular, to travel to the Midwest to document some of the suffering that people were experiencing as a result of their difficult economic situation. And we know quite a lot about this woman, actually. Her name is Florence Thompson. She was only 32 years old when this photograph was taken, even though she looks a little bit older. She had 7 children, and she lived here on a farm in the Midwest, and basically had a grapes of wrath kind of experience where she gets in a pickup truck and travels to California to try to get a job picking peas to earn a living to provide so her children can eat. And when she arrives there, they just have had a frost the night before and all of the peas are frozen, so she has no work. And it was really a devastating story. And every time I talk about this photograph in my 20th century class when we covered photography, you know, the students were always so concerned. And one day a student of mine brought in a current event where one of her children, these are 2 little boys, but one of the daughters, who's not pictured here, who's now in her late 60s, was interviewed on NPR and told the story that they ended up being okay. Her mother ended up getting work. They didn't starve. All of the children lived, and shoo, we're all greatly relieved. That's why I had to tell you that story. But it was a very serious situation. The most well-known Kansas photographer who documented the human condition was Gordon Parks, who died in 2006. Looking at a couple of contemporary artists, Lori Nix does a whole series called Accidentally Kansas, and it seems to sum up some of the things we were talking about pretty well. She lives in New York now, but she says that as a child growing up in the 70s, during a time when all of those movies like Earthquake, remember that movie that came out? Movies about different type of natural disasters and so forth were kind of popular. That really impacted her as well as her childhood growing up in Kansas. So she creates these dioramas. She creates these fabricated scenes with the little cars and the little trees and the little buildings. Then she photographs them as if she's documenting a disaster or a disaster movie that was filmed in Kansas. And this is what Lori Nix says about her childhood here in Kansas. She says, "My town was too small to have a name. I grew up surrounded by the wheat fields of northwestern Kansas. I have been in tornadoes, blizzards, and floods. As a girl growing up, surrounded by what seemed to be the large expanse of an uncaring nature, I witnessed some strange and gruesome animal fatalities. I remember a pond that had frozen over very early in the season, trapping thousands of frogs in the ice. I chipped them out and threw them at my sister." So she was very much affected in a way that artists seem to be by the Kansas environment. Here's another one of her works with the flooding. Judith Mackey is an artist from Cottonwood Falls who paints the Flint Hills. And is anybody going to the Symphony in the Flint Hills this summer? I know the tickets sell out in moments. You know, a funny story I have to tell you, I got a call a month or so, 2 months ago, from the woman in charge of the Symphony in the Flint Hills, and she asked me if I would be the juror for the art competition that they have associated with the Flint Hills. And she said, "Of course we'll pay you." And I said, "Oh, no need to pay me. However, I have been trying to go to the Symphony in the Flint Hills for years. I can never get tickets." She said, "It's a deal. I'll send you 2 tickets if you'll juror." And I thought, yes, I hope they ask me again next year. I have finally gotten tickets to the Symphony in the Flint Hills, so I'm so excited to go. And looking at all of the paintings, that it was so hard to jury that competition, just selecting artists for the exhibition, let alone choosing one artist as the winner of the event and going on the commemorative poster was very, very difficult. But Judith Mackey, who exhibits there, she has a gallery in Elmdale, I think. Is it Elmdale or Strong? No, it's actually in Cottonwood Falls. She feels very blessed living in the Flint Hills, and this is what she says. She says, "The Flint Hills are a never-ending inspiration to me. With the exception of the mountains and the ocean, the subject matter is unlimited for the artist. I am blessed to live here, where I am able to paint the prairie and the many day-to-day, even hour-to-hour changes." I think her work is really especially beautiful. Jane Forries, who teaches at the Kansas City Art Institute, recently had an exhibition in New York at a Soho gallery called Going Home. And in that exhibition, she displayed a number of scenes representing the Kansas landscape. I wanted to mention Larry Thomas. Larry Thomas is chair of the Fine Arts Department here at JCCC. One of his paintings is part of the JCCC art collection. It was just recently installed in the Rainier Center. So you can go see it. It looks very similar to this work. And I wanted to include Larry Thomas because not all Kansas artists represent the Kansas landscape. Larry Thomas represents a lot of almost kind of molecular structures. He's had some health issues over his lifetime, and he'll say that a lot of his work deals with that. He did a whole series in downtown Kansas City for the Kansas City Avenue of the Arts project called Urban Camouflage, where he took photographs and recreated the background here. He actually created the image out of the set. He had to test the color. It took him months and months and months to match it with the color of the buildings in the crossroads. These are vinyl, almost like applique stickers. This is my old boss, the assistant dean of the Arts and Humanities Department, who posed for him for that, and then he would paint it the matching color. This is actually Larry Thomas himself there. Andrzej Zielinski, who was a student of Larry's as an undergraduate here at JCCC. He got his associate's degree here. He transferred to the Chicago Art Institute, where he got his BFA. After the Chicago Art Institute, he went to Yale and got his MFA. Yale has the premier art school in the United States. And now he's golden and exhibits his paintings in major galleries in the United States. They're in major collections. We have several in our collection here. He's done a whole series that deal with kind of 20th, 21st century technology. He does a series of computers, ATMs, which is one of this one here is one. He did a whole series of paper shredders. They're really cool, and this wonderful, super thick application of paint that kind of reminds me of Wayne Thiebaud, if you're familiar with his work. We have a few at the Nelson, but rather than cakes and gumball machines, they're ATM machines. Oh, here's one of his recent works, one of his paper shredders. And Ki-Suk Lee is the last artist that I'd like to end with. She immigrated to the U.S. in 1964 when she was only 23 years old. She now lives and works in Overland Park, and her work is in New York galleries and in collections worldwide. And Lee says that when she was a child, growing up in Korea, she shared a bedroom with her mother and her grandmother. And she would often be woken up early in the wee hours of the morning with the rustling sounds of sewing that she could hear in the background. And she says that many women who cannot read or write will express themselves in their sewing. And this issue of this painstaking process of patient needlework, she says, reminds her of flowers in a garden. It's kind of the same process of tending a garden. Here's another one of her works here. Sometimes she will layer doilies, wet doilies, and almost use them as a printmaking process to impress onto another substance, paper, for example, or canvas, and she will compare that to pressing flowers. And this is a slide of my own that I have. It just reminded me of the typical Kansas prairie, and even though we see someone like Ki-Suk Lee, not originally from even the United States, let alone Kansas, but we're able to draw some similarities between her work and what we might think of as typical Kansas imagery. I also wanted to end with her because I think it reminds us of the universality and the diversity of artists that we've seen today so far. Looking at prominent Kansas artists, maybe the picture you had when you came maybe has changed a little bit. And I just wanted to show you the image of this book that I read a long time ago, probably 20 years ago, and it's one of those books that has really stayed with me, The Power of Place, and it talks about how important our surroundings are. And a quote from this book, it says that the study of molecular genetics reveals what a cell will be is determined not just by what it is, but also who its neighbors are. And that the place where you live really does impact who you are, what you think, and how you experience the world. And when Jim Leiker, the Kansas Studies Institute, asked me if I would be interested in giving a talk on Kansas artists, I immediately thought of this book and how I would try to frame this lecture as far as the power of place for the Kansas artist. So basically, just to conclude, we've seen a number of Kansas artists today, many drawing on the Kansas landscape, some such as Curry and Nix emphasizing maybe some of the more violent, foreboding aspects of the Kansas landscape, and others such as Judith Mackey and Stan Hurd really celebrating the beauty of the Kansas landscape.